Two distinct things. Bird, anything he played, what was he doing? Dizzy responsible, a pattern that's smart. What he was doing must have been going forward, bird late. I'll go home, a changing person. Dizzy peer and age miles, names and names and names and art. Bird luck and a Valentine, what was he doing? Dizzy art and the drummer solos and pop, bird unfortunate, and general dizzy efforts, the music.
So a little bit about erasures. Erasure is basically, it's a form of poetry where instead of creating all of the words yourself, you're starting with a text that already exists. And a lot of times it's some kind of charged text. And it's basically, you take the text that's already there, you erase the words that you don't want, that aren't a part of the poem, and then you leave it there. And a lot of times it's to make kind of like commentary on the source material. It's also fun and interesting just to find poems inside of collections of words that are already there. So when I got started, I was like, I don't know what to write. Like I'm feeling kind of like at a loss. So to be able to start with something that was already there felt really good. And it wasn't until I was deep inside of the project and it had been dropped by two different publishing houses at that point that I realized there was also a docupoetics project, which is another form of poetry I had no idea existed. I had the pleasure of going to the Naropa writing workshop over in Boulder, Colorado. This was 2001. It's 2002. And there was a poet there, Anaïs Duplain, black poet who's deep in docupoetics, which is basically looking at poetry as kind of like a form of journalism, where you have an existing archive of materials or just like real life events or interviews, things like that, and use those as the source material to create poetry that gives life to that archive. And I realized in doing Bird Diz that was like, I want to be able to have more of my voice inside of it. And also, this is a project that deserves to be well researched. And what form that research is going to take. And so, like I watched documentaries, and I read some books. Amazing, biography of Bud Powell was definitely on top for that. But I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and it was amazing how many amazing performances and interviews from that time were already there. And it just, it was this window into time, and they had 1,000 some views in some cases. So I was just taking notes while I was watching these videos, and those notes slowly kind of turned into these essay poems. And working with lyric essay was something that I did a bit inside of open source as well. So, and so eventually the book became kind of like these erasures and reflections of them, and then they were framed by this footage and poems that were written off of that footage.
Miles before miles. Miles before miles. In between miles, before miles grew a variation or virtuoso, necessary and inevitable. Revolution generates, rebels, or reacts to the preceding night. Flowering Malcolm. When this occurs is no more a matter of sake than one of ideology. Writers in common and common writers find, process find. He must be well endowed, In literary terms, of course, in dubbed comic, and lost coming, a wolf in heart, the jazz was restless. A place of authority, overthrowing a swing and a change to difficult. A fragmented brass more closely related to now.
And this West Indian girl, it just
Miles before miles. Miles before miles. Miles before
and
miles.
this West Indian girl had just come to the United States, and she didn't know too many people there, and she was lonesome, and she didn't have a job, and, so she was walking up 125th Street, and as she's walking up 125th, she heard this. She heard this sound, a rhythm from the West Indies, which I had made a record on this, and she stopped, and she felt at home, and then she stopped.
Charlie Christian, 1941. After they're taken away, everything you touch becomes a drum. And Milton's the beginning of this story. This simple alchemy took the form of a creole of swing, scat sounds, and the blues. Cats off work serving and scrounging and gigging the flex chords and arpeggio runs and tongues. Christian was 24. Friends in this Harlem cafe called his guitar playing very horn-like for the way he plucked their valves open and shut. Texas born, in OK City raised after busking in the deep deuce. There's a rhythm that comes every time there's nothing to do but dance for kind white smiles and ones. Thread together the studs of your dead dad's hand-me-down dance music and feeling songs. Boredom and money and play. They put Christian on in his teens, and nobody want to hear them old blues. His electric, a joyous superhero briefly echoing down streets in solos lost to time. Christian was 25 when he died. The year after this recording was pressed. Nonetheless, the notes in his arrangements were cited in monk classics years after, though shifted to an atonal C sharp at the time the tuberculosis spread through his lungs and emaciated his face, and thus caused what others blew soon to be shaped by his strum.
All right, guys, so that is Charlie Christian's solo on Rose Room. If you haven't checked that out, you should. If you haven't checked out any Charlie Christian, you should. He is widely recognized as the father of electric guitar. He influenced many different styles from blues to jazz. I think even Jimi Hendrix cites him as an influence. So what I want to do in this lesson is break down two
Say
key
fame
phrases that he uses in the solo
after
that I
a
just
long
played.
and
About
painful
how
death
to
is a
play
fine
over the changes
obituary.
of a blues in F, using
Say
the swing
a
scale
slave
in what I
son's
always think of
song
as
is an algorithm we must inevitably program into a button press.
Today I'm going all jazz.
This foreign home,
2/3 of mine.
so clearly an aesthetic direction we can grow a perfect God from. Say tattooing a lost name onto your arm and occasionally hating yourself for how come it's easy to build a rich pile of progress from is the same thing as a black boy not getting shot tonight. Say all of it if you have to, but even now, even this tribute of deconstructions of our homeless, brilliant dead is not the same as a spolo spark of play on a lark by a poor player wailing on his night off.
So, fast forward to the end of 2021. I submitted it. It got picked up by Phonograph Editions, which is an amazing press in Portland that they press vinyl and they put out books of poetry. So it was it could not be better. They do lots of music-based projects. And they had just started a new imprint called Bunny Press that was all kind of visual poetry and things like that. So, I got to be on the ground floor of that new imprint. And wanted to start performing it. And over in Moonstone and otherwise, music is, as I said, it's always been a huge part of my process. And, integrating music and integrating music into the performance has always been big. Almost every book I've done has had some kind of musical performance along with it. So with this one, even more so, it's about jazz. There's all of this archival footage that's in place that I want to be able to share. And I started to think of the book as a transmitter of the videos, of being able to kind of see what it's like to sit down, with Dizzy Gillespie in, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and to be able to get a sense of what that kind of black art is, of what just kind of that dialogue as a musician can be inside of Black Skin, but also just kind of in this way that is so passionate and involved in the work. There were so many performances that, there's a Thelonious Monk performance of him in Stockholm playing and then just getting up and just kind of wandering through the studio while while the bassist was having his solo, and just allowing himself to just be in it and lost inside of it and be completely himself in a way that was hard for me as an artist, and I feel that is hard for a lot of especially black artists to just let themselves go in the way that they did on a regular basis, and it was super inspiring. So I wanted that to be a part of Bird Diz, and performance seemed like the best way to do it. Projections seemed like the best way to do it, and I wanted some way of having the music, the performance, and projections of the footage and all the visual elements to be one complete experience. And that's kind of what led me, once Larry gave me the opportunity, because I think that was the first time on stage that I did Bird Diz, to join up with Elliot Levin, amazing saxophonist here in Philadelphia, legend, my good friend Scott Sigel, and go up and make it into one piece of art. So I did that. Worked in it for a while, workshopped it with the musicians, and put it up on stage. Larry was there, up front seat. I think you basically just wanted to show for yourself, and it was all right, we'll have to have other people come too. So what did you think of it?
I thought it was unique. I had no idea what to expect. The relationship to music and poetry. I knew the addition of video, of pictorial history was totally outside of my realm. I found it fascinating. And what I thought as I was sitting here was this should be filmed. And it should be filmed so that you can have close-ups of the different aspects of the film video, of the poetry reading, of the musicians playing, and I saw it, and I love live performances, but I saw this on film, and I reached out to Philly Cam and Jerry and said, hey, this is really interesting. can we do this? And the answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is, again, you know, you have these networks of people and organizations, and you know, Philly Cam has always been open to things like that. So I thought it was so we did it.
This poem is very short. It is called Rent Due. It starts like this. Rent due in Mirrors, private apartments. Shep once again. Don't mess with him, okay? He's very proud, and he's probably gonna cut you. Rent due in Mirrors, private apartments. Shep once again. Don't mess with him, okay? He's very proud, and he's probably gonna cut you. About the 1930s, there were a number of fresh trumpets developments. The Real by 16 redacted, disappeared, couldn't read music yet. Only Way, Keep the Job, Note by Note, copied unconsciously, unlocked in New York City, listened. Form builds experience, Tracy pirated solos pirated, run faster, more change, more notes between similarities, between contours, more notes between masters, between variations. He masters more notes between similarities, variations beyond company and heats, beyond the natural limits and sense, form solo, build, valves down, glass, the masks are off, and Lester as a young John the Baptizer, but no violence. Too far for him, or was it that he felt slightly safe within? Lester slurred his own story, a soft, flattish, quiet, ingenious, improvised, devious play. More or less abundant, maybe harness 2 or 4 more freely. He played to something fresh as when interjecting a smile before they prepared for his arrival game 5. But 1941 on a bar stage, high, he almost landed most nights. Most nights he almost landed. Man, Bird would be up and under a side street, either to play or swing, either to play on or turn. Bird was a Jordan on drums, on a curtain of drums. Jordan was redacted. Further fingers packed. The composition collapsed from the shock, but he remained aware, absorbent, and thinking behind the somewhat stats singing and general clownishness of this man. Pace works, love discipline. His real name was redacted, Gillespie. Boy, that cat sound, you know he's fast becoming one of my favorites, including Verb, including Quincy Jones, and Jones for short, including Dizzy. Picture of Dizzy called High Priest of Bop, Taken and Niece, excluding Bud Powell, excluding Lee Morgan, excluding Mary Lou Williams and Shapley on sax, excluding Bill Eckstein on arrangements, and Charlie Christian on guitar, and A.K. Simmons redacted, and redacted Pinso on drums, and Melba Liston's redacted, and Milton's redacted vibraphone, and Sarah's redacted voice, and Horace's redacted silver, and Dexter Gordon's trumpet, and Kenny Clark's drums, and redacted Parker's redacted, excluding paragraphs, excluding personnel and persons inside of it, and personal if it existed on the page, excluding personal and pronouns, Dizzy related his and he, excluding they and she, excluding you, none included, excluding I, excluding all song titles and all dates and all numbers or references to math, excluding indications of arrangements, most stretched out with exacto, excluding the word original in all contexts, including flag waver, excluding initial before anger, excluding has subsided after anger, including the anger and capitalizing it.
So obviously, you know, two central figures of bebop, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, you know, where Dizzy Gillespie coming in, you know, like coming from St. Louis and kind of like being inside of his workshop and working to develop this like dense new improvisational technique that nobody had ever seen before. And you know, like kind of, I mean, he had, I realized later on that he had like much more, you know, that he worked his musicianship really, really hard. But also like, you know, like was always high, you know, was kind of like a recluse in his own way, and really spiraled out of control, you know, kind of like this classic idea of like this burnout kind of musician, and in a very tragic way that you see. And then on the other side, you have Dizzy Gillespie, who comes up in the tradition of big band, and you know, like definitely pushes it and has like an incredibly unique like style of play, but was just kind of like more established, always more. Yeah, like I mean, he like the first poem, the first reflection that I kind of do was of a Dizzy Gillespie performance that happened in like 1930s about, and you know, big eyes, big smile, and for me looking at it, where I was like, oh, you kind of Samboing a bit, you know. And it was funny because you know, like Dizzy Gillespie had a lot to say about like Satchmo and of having kind of like these divisions. It was like, oh, you're just kind of like making, you know, these big eyes for a white audience. And at that point in the music, you know, with big band, the function of jazz was just to be dance music, to be able to, you know, ideally charm, you know, rich white audiences. And so, you know, while Dizzy Gillespie always reacted against that, he was, you know, he was more in stream with it. He was from that tradition in a way that Charlie Parker was not. And so for me, it kind of went to these two different ways of being a black artist, and of kind of like, you know, you have this conformity, and then you have this wild, inventive, and still kind of like tragic burnout, and trying to kind of reconcile those two things. It was great to be able to see that story just kind of like evolve a little bit more as I did more research, and how much Charlie Parker, you know, there was just so much musicianship that was involved. He did a whole, like later in his career, he did a whole piece with strings of trying to bring kind of like a classical music element into it. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of like this kind of, you know, these two different approaches to being a black artist and being a black male artist, especially, and trying to make avant-garde art. And then the progression of bebop itself, of going from something that was just meant to make white people dance to being something that's so crazy and specific and experimental and boundary pushing, that people couldn't dance to it anymore. And so yeah, that's kind of where both of them came in, and so many other like amazing musicians came up along the way. Charlie Christian and Bud Powell and Max Roach and Abby Lincoln.
This piece is after Max Roach and Abby Lincoln performing Tears for Johannesburg, 1964. black woman, there and gone like a ghost, no words. If you need words to say tears, you're not crying. Don't say the word crying if you want to learn pain. Bawl like the sun died. Bald like a shaved head. Sackcloth eyes and tea tears bleeding into your collarbone. Crying is also a bouncing forward if you have nothing that heals but work. Run. Running until you burst in a clean white room. Something like a cross is in the background of the Belgium stage, but strung out like a gutted piano. And then we hear the piano itself, and it is dignified and swung. Short solo, minor, chaotic clusters that warm the major spread. The bass line ends and loops back on the low end of the scale and jumps back Sisyphus again. Crisp black funeral suits on everyone but Lincoln. Where has she gone? The bass line ends, an empty mic where a black woman sung halo like an afro, no words when the time comes crashing. How effortless and precise in the rage. Muscles like sand dunes, under Roach's face, flexed and released in his hands. Where did you know, I went to Johannesburg 55 years after. And I've never seen a city more under siege. I've never seen a flow of citizens so scared to walk the streets anytime. Electrified fences around yoga studios now, and white South Africans at drum circles telling me they're colorblind. Black Americans at Afro-punk, drunk in front of guards with semi-automatic rifles scanning for Zulu boys, flying into Johannesburg. The township roofs are made of jutting slabs of corrugated steel. In the sun, the glint of those shanty rows cuts your eyes, slits it clean. Extension cords made of center blocks down streets with no name. Just as quick, the township disappears under our landing gear. The captain says, "Welcome home." The hi-hat lands steady on the whole notes. Roach scatters a chaotic roll on the hinge where the top is loose. Fade out and onto Lincoln's face, screaming out a final movement. Screaming out a final wordless prayer.
The amount of work and albums and reinventions that these jazz artists did during their time is just incredible. And how they stayed so deep inside of the music and inside of that direction of where they wanted to go with the music was really inspiring. So I wanted to capture that and allow for the book to also be more inventive in the same ways as it went along.
One of the things that always fascinates me is how history and art combined.
Always.
You know, those are kind of my two passions. And that was one of the things that I just found so amazing about your show, and particularly the Max Roach. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, it was and that was part of that thing of your reading in front of this, where I could see some of it that you just want to see the film hear your voice over it, and some of it, you know, is the poetry, and some of it is the music, and to bring history into that process just fascinated me, and just I think it's an exceptional piece.
No, I appreciate that, and that's something that's always, I mean, from Who Do You Love on up, you know, like, I mean, histories has always been a really important part of Moonstone's, just like mission and what they did with art, and with poetry. So I don't think I saw it at the time, but it makes it even more appropriate, and I'm more happy that you know, that it can be a part of Moonstone.
And the evolution of the piece, so, you know, when you have something that's really working as art, it becomes a conversation, and it demands that you do certain things that you had no idea of at your origin.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah.
Where the project forced you to go that you didn't know you were going?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, even just starting with the erasures, you know, I was just making erasures, and I was just kind of like seeing what was coming out of it. And so the idea of how it would be laid out in the book, and the conversations it would have with itself, the conversations it have with the story of Bebop, were something that evolved over time. Once I started making the performance, then, you know, number one, I was like, okay, well, this is kind of like a documentary, but it's a documentary that is, you know, it's creative, and it's meant to engage with me personally. You know, there's personal stories that are involved in it, and it's just kind of, it's looser, so that it's, you know, and it's meant to be engaging. So once I started putting it together, originally it was about, all right, I have a couple of different pieces of footage that I want to show, and sometimes I want to kind of intercut on top of it. You know, sometimes I want to be front and center, sometimes I just kind of like want to be in the background and narrate the experience along with the music. And there were also visual pieces that came along with it too. So that's been an amazing, that was an amazing process. When inspiration that came up a lot was the show Soul that I hadn't heard of before. That was a public television show. I want to say it was like the 60s, 70s. And it was a talk show, kind of like before a lot of talk shows that were out, led by a Black queer like organizer. And it was just the, you know, the best of the best. It was before Soul Train. It was just Soul. And it was like the best of the best of Black dancers, Black musicians, and Black poets, all put together, you know, with kind of like interesting visuals that were behind it, and also like a live talk show. And so after the initial footage came out, like that was something that, you know, was put out that was like, oh yeah, this kind of looks like that. And then I did a production of Bird Diz with Jay Johnson, who's this poet who's done a lot of projection and mixed media work in Philly. And he was like, yeah, you really should check out the show Soul. And like there's an episode of it on YouTube, you know, with Bill Withers that really knocked him out. And then there was a documentary about it on HBO. So I was like, all right, I have to watch this. And it was incredible of just kind of, and then I started to get, like, because I didn't really have a vision of how it was going to work on film. And I feel like that's something that's still evolving. But with that, it was like, all right, yeah, there was a whole, you know, there's a history of being able to have the energy of live performance and of live Black performance that is also kind of like cross genre. That's out there already. So that was really exciting. I mean, I've never worked with film before. You know, then there was a time that I worked over at Philly Cam, but that was a live show, and I'm used to live performance. So kind of thinking about, you know, like what kind of shots that I want to do, or how to kind of bring things into the foreground, into the background, that's a little bit harder with live performance. And I kind of leave it up to the audience, you know, like, I mean, I think a bit about staging, but it was like, the information is all here. Whatever you want to lock your eyes onto is where you lock your eyes onto. But when you were dealing with like multiple cameras and green screen possibly, and like multiple projections that are on top of you that you can interact with, there are whole new types of elements So yeah, the first shoot that we did over at Philly Cam, it was incredible. Number one, because I was like, just the amount of resources that were provided by the organization just like floored me, and that they were so about kind of thinking about my vision and respecting it and just providing all of the things that are necessary to try to create that back and forth documentary style of performance poetry was really humbling. You know.
There were two distinct things. Bird, anything he played, what was he doing? Dizzy responsible, a pattern that's smart. What he was doing must have been going forward, Bird late. I'll go home a changing person. Dizzy peer and age miles, names and names and names and art. Bird luck and a Valentine, what was he doing? Dizzy art and the drummer solos and pop. Bird unfortunate and general. Dizzy efforts, the music. Bird's general and Dizzy balances between sections, a changing person. Bird reduced like life, or Dizzy life-like excitement, but still decidedly lo-fi. Charlie, of course, continued to battle. Charlie was drinking and was drinking down and was drinking the relaxed circumstances and was drinking for the desire and was drinking to counteract the desire for drugs and was drinking the drugs and was drinking symptoms at this stage and was drinking on to the stage and was drinking drugs becoming ideas on to the stage and was drinking the stage and was drinking to perform less and was drinking to perform Carnegie Hall shared and was drinking to function somehow physiologically without becoming re-addicted again and was drinking to get up and was drinking drugs pushed from the wings on to the stage, asleep in the bath and broke and was drinking to counteract the desire to drug time. Quick! Someone would know what something real good is, Bird, at 5 or 6, and Bird would go with them. This is a funeral song. It begins. Bebop themes. Bebop themes are all familiar. There's nothing dated about play. This death, firm and valued. How feather and film this image, this most moving play, the funeral service. Most of us didn't even know until it began to blow gently from the back, an image, the most beautiful playing ever heard. Recordings are attentions to perceptions, and every perception stands somewhat apart from the main. This isn't, strictly speaking, a jazz song at all, but a suite.
One of the things is Charlie Christian, which was like a super young jazz guitarist. He played electric guitar. Because Milton's was kind of, it's known as, you know, just kind of like the after hours spot where all of the different big band musicians would just come together and very simple, have home cooked food, and just get on a stage and just jam into the following day. And Charlie Christian, his just plucking style was very informative to a lot of bebop artists at that time. And so for me, it was just the fact that, number one, that even though he was playing an electric guitar, which is something that we don't really think about with it, he was accepted. He was praised for what he was doing, and there was a communication across different genres and across different instruments that was happening with him. And just the vibe, that I got of what was happening in Milton's, that it was it wasn't for an audience. It was, it wasn't, there was a competition that was at it, but it was all about just it was a cipher, and that same vibe of just artists getting together, collaborating all in their own way, respecting each other, learning lessons off of each other, and building something that's new, that's their own, of that being important and healing. That was really encouraging and exciting for me. And and unfortunately Charlie Christian, died really, early on. It was 25 when he died of tuberculosis. So again, it was why isn't of him being preserved for his life at the same time and not just his art, is something that I think about a lot. Dizzy Gillespie, his the way he was able to maintain joy throughout his entire career, even though at the beginning, I bristled at it, but the fact that he had so much respect for himself. He didn't feel like he needed to over academicize himself, but he knew that he deserved respect, and he demanded that respect while never losing his joy and never feeling like he had to be smarter than he was or talk anyway. I didn't feel any kind of assimilation in him, even though it was easy to think that at the beginning. So yeah, that idea of keeping your joy, and that joy transmits itself to other people who are deep in the art, is definitely a huge lesson for me in this project. Trying to think. Thelonious Monk has always been one of my biggest musical, artistic inspirations. And once again, just being so inside of himself, and so unafraid to just let there be space and let there and to work with anticipation, and being aware of what people were looking for and giving it to them and not giving it to them, and just the play that's inside of it, how much is inside of his pauses, completely changed the way that I worked. So it was great to be able to just dig into live performances of him doing it. And also seeing of how, I wouldn't be surprised if Thelonious Monk was born right now, they would probably say he was on the spectrum, for easily. But that he had an outlet for it that was so beautiful and so particular, and a sense of self inside of it, once again, is, especially as a black artist and as a black male artist, that means so much to me. To see how raw it was. There's so many little stories. Bud Powell spent quite a bit of time in Philadelphia, and he was pianist. Comes from a classical background, but really broke a lot of ground. And kind of the things that he faced when it comes to police brutality, definitely hit me hard, and kind of this sense of, at the very end of his life, he was in Europe for a while, but combination of alcohol abuse and drug abuse, and a lot of things seemed like they got started when he was beat up by the police on North Broad, not too far away from where I grew up. Definitely hit me hard going through that story, and it made me wary, in some ways, of how much to push yourself, And I guess kind of like, yeah, trying to be as true to yourself as possible and not trying to show off for other people or for, you know, like white acceptance, because it's, you know, it didn't get him far, and it didn't get a whole lot of, you know, musicians that were inside of that lineage far. So, but it was really good to be able to end with Dizzy and of seeing kind of like a real success story of how to keep your joy and keep your passion and keep that like almost more than yourself connection to creativity.
Dizzy Gillespie, 1981. Starting with a cane, bangled with powdery luck. You can sashay an old body like a fringe skirt. You can have a fat booty at 70 and conduct. You can strut your most obvious joy. You can, in a room full of whiteness, turn your back and let your khakis flare to the funk of your arrangement. You can live with the house lights blaring and sleep in the black in between. You can die vibrating. The audience loves you, and the audience needs you, and the audience doesn't care. The audience isn't there. Look how they wait. The math, that is a splash of color and a conversation with a foreign kin. You've already won if you're dancing by yourself. Explaining an answer in a wave that penetrates the skin. Laugh as it disappears, all of it. Oh, Allah and Jesus and Baha'i and Buddha, in my eyes now turning in. Oh, rhythm, our merged language. Oh, unicorn. Oh, great bird of science and religion, flopping, sloppy, towards our distant home. And that's it.
I feel like, especially poets, no poet wants to say that they're a poet. It's like a long time, even if you've been doing it for who knows how many years. It's just a point where you realize that, you know, I think I never really considered myself a poet until I went to New York and really, really tried to let it go. And I was like, this is ruining my life. There are so many opportunities that I could be having if I didn't do this. So let me just like not do this. And I spent a good 2 years after being deeply involved in slam and performance and coaching and, you know, and producing. I had like 3 chapbooks at that point, and I was just done. And yeah, I went to New York and I hated it. And I just realized that that I had no choice but to keep doing this. And so I guess surrendering, you know, was the biggest thing. But as far as kind of like what makes me love it, you know, I love how art expands. It feels like it expands outside of your experience, and it makes you feel like you're connected to something that's bigger than you could ever be. And, you know, like the stream of artistic communities and that engagement, and just like the universality of it, you know, because if you're really deep into it and you're really passionate about it, like you don't even need to speak the same language. Yeah.
Well, when we met, you were also into computers.
Yeah.
I found it particularly interesting of the kind of mind that would deal with computers and that logic and the artistic vision that you showed way back.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was talking to a poet a little while ago, Matthew Klein, about like the early poets that we were into. And when I was in school, it was the first time that we did kind of like literary analysis in high school. And I was like, let's dig into this. Like, what does this actually mean? And there was a Emily Dickinson poem that we dug into. And there were just so many different meanings. And the way that she writes, you know, she rhymes when she wants to, and sometimes she doesn't. And it's weird, and, you know, it's dark sometimes, but also tender. And she was just like, oh yeah, all of these meanings mean something. And so I was talking and was like, you know, it was the first time that I thought of poetry as a technology. And, you know, I was a Legos kid. I love to just like put things together for the joy of building things. And that was the point where I was like, oh, language is something that you can use to build. And, yeah, and at that point, it was just like, oh, there's a whole world of things that you can build, and it can have meaning, and it can have joy, and yeah,
have purpose.
Yeah, it can have purpose, right? And it can be bigger than all of those things. Like, what is the purpose of love? You know, like, what is the purpose of joy? You know, it has it, but also it's just so good to just be in it. So to be able to make things that can just create that environment of a feeling, that's always been what I've really been in mirrors, private apartments, shut closed again, don't mess with them, okay? He's very proud, he's probably gonna cut you. Rent to about the 1930s, there were a number of fresh trumpets developments. The real by 16 redacted, disappeared, couldn't read music yet. Only way, keep the job, note by note, copied more unconsciously.
When we started Moonstone, we had this poetry series that other people were hosts to. And our first big project was the celebration of Black writing, which started in 91. And we did 18 years of celebration of Black writing. And we did 7 years of the Paul Robeson Festival. And we did 7 years of Hidden History. And it's always that art and history relationship, which is what these posters are all about. Moonstone also was involved in early childhood development. And one of the people we really liked was Elliot Eisner, who wrote a book called The Arts and the Creation of Mind. And what he said is, what the arts teach is that there's multiple answers to every question. What multiple choice testing teaches is that there's only one answer, and that's not true. You know, it's the arts are the first thing that are cut. They're you know, we're going through a period of censorship, and it's huge, a huge element, because you know, people need access. They need to be able to make up their own minds. You know, the attack on libraries and on education, you know, of creating indoctrination rather than learning, rather than teaching people how to think and figure things out themselves. You know, it's an essential aspect of democracy. And it's under attack. And it needs to be resisted. One of the things that what I try to do with Moonstone, you know, is communication. I come out of the bookstore, you know, I was in the book industry from 1960 on, and the issue is communication. And you know, one of our problems today is we don't know how to listen to each other. We don't know how to speak to each other. Also, tell you a story. Marita Golden was here once, and in the audience, after her reading, a fellow said, "How come you black women are getting published and us black men can't?" And she said, "Black women are probably the most oppressed group in the country. Therefore, we have nothing to lose. Therefore, we can tell the truth, and the truth resonates." You know, that's what drew me into this. You know, is through the civil rights movement, through the writers that were getting published. You sense the truth. You know. And that's why I've been continue doing it. You know, art connects you to the truth.